Welcome everyone to the next in our series of interviews for the future leaders and their interviews with data leaders. I'm very pleased that this week's guest is Professor Christl Donnelly, who's Vice President of External Affairs for the Royal Statistical Society. A bit of background about what these calls are for and why we've been doing these interviews. So the Royal Statistical Society has a commitment to promoting diversity and inclusion in statistics, data science and related professions. We've launched this program to support data professionals from ethnic minority backgrounds in order for them to become future leaders, and this has been funded by the Academy of Social Sciences, so we're thankful for them. It's very much motivated by the phrase, you cannot be what you cannot see. And our future program aims to celebrate the diversity of data professionals and empower data professionals from underrepresented groups to pursue leadership positions within the RSS, but also within the wider data community. So working with us to inspire future generations of statisticians, data scientists, data analysts, and other data professionals. As to why we went ahead with these interviews in this format, well, when we met with the future leaders earlier in 2024, leadership was one of the key themes that came out of our early discussions. There was a great interest in how they could aspire to be leaders in data, the kind of skills and knowledge required, and how and where they could find that information about career development. So the future leaders suggested a list of suitable leaders they would like to approach or interview. And hopefully with these interviews, we'll bring understanding to them, but also to others as they watch back as well. And there'll be a future leader page on our website where you'll hopefully have access to all the content, including all the interviews we've been doing as part of these series. So with regards to this session, I will hand over shortly to Drew Shah, who's our future leader, leading the questions for this. And then they'll interact with Professor Donnelly as we'll go through, and then I'll chip in with some questions and some summary at the end. So Drew, I'll have to hand over to you.
Thanks, Ricky. Welcome, Christl. So can you, to start us off, give us a brief introduction to your career so far, your pathway within stats and data, and if at all, is this differed from your original dream of what you wanted to be?
Okay, so unlike when you go to university in the UK, when you go to the university in the US, you don't have to say, this is the one thing I'm going to study. This is my major even. You get accepted by a college for being sufficiently educated and judged to have the right potential for that university. So I went to Oberlin College, which is a liberal arts college, so it means it covers a wide range of fields. And I imagined I was going to be a biology major. I also imagined I was going to have a minor in German because I thought it was a good thing to keep up my language skills. Didn't keep up the German, and I didn't end up being a biology major. I ended up being a math major. The first courses I took in biology were genetics and population biology, and those were great. I thought, yes, I'm right on track. I'm right in the right place. Then it moved into the more organismal biology, and I've been taking math alongside that because I needed math for the biology degree as well as chemistry and so on. And then I really realized I was really enjoying the mathematical things. I enjoyed the genetics and the population biology components of biology, but it wasn't really where my skills lay. So I continued with a math major. I didn't know what I was going to do with that. And as I got to the end of my undergraduate degree, I went to the biology department and I went to the math department and I said, I want to do something that combines biology and math. What can I do? Unfortunately, they each said, oh, we don't know about that. We only know about biology degrees. We only know about math degrees. So I bought, I didn't have the internet. So I bought a book of a guide to graduate programs in the sciences. And I just flipped through and read each thing. And I got to biostatistics and biometrics. They had slightly different descriptions. So rather than realizing they were often the same kind of departments, it just depended on when they were founded. I thought, ooh, I like the description of biostatistics better. So I only applied to biostatistics departments. And I went to Harvard. So I did a master's and a doctorate there. That was in the School of Public Health. So that gave me the opportunity to combine my interest in biology and using mathematics in that area. It also opened the whole world of public health and epidemiology up to me, which were things I hadn't heard of before, had no exposure to. As I was coming to the end of my doctoral degree, I'd gone straight through and I decided I wanted to have a year abroad. So I applied for international opportunities as well as sort of backup positions in the US. And I went to Edinburgh for a year. I thought I stayed for 3 years and I haven't left the UK since. So I spent 3 years teaching maths and stats. So it was a combined maths stats department, and I was teaching third and fourth year Scottish students. Then I saw this ad in All Stats, the email job list, for a statistician to join Roy Anderson's group, which was the Wellcome Trust Center for Epidemiology of Infectious Diseases. I had already worked on infectious diseases during my master's. I did a project in the modeling of infectious disease course that I took. It was seen as quite a fringe thing to do. But I took that and analyzed data on HIV-1 and HIV-2 in West African sex workers. I didn't work, although HIV was very prominent at that time. I was in Harvard from 1988 to 1992 when the first testing of AZT was happening as a treatment for HIV-infected individuals. And I didn't work on that specifically, but I saw a lot of that work going on. So when I went to Scotland, one of the research things I did was work with the MRC Center, or the MRC Biostatistics Unit in Cambridge. They had like a sub office in Edinburgh, which was called Biostatistics Initiative for AIDS in Scotland. And I collaborated with them. So I was working on infectious diseases there. But there was this great opportunity in Oxford, and though I still didn't think I was going to stay in the UK permanently, I got the job. So I came down and joined this center of epidemiologists. So it was people working in epidemiology that came from a wide range of areas. They came from biology, they came from math, they came from physics. There's a demographer. None of them were statisticians per se. And so I was told, lots of people will come to you with questions. You can give them quick answers. You can collaborate. You're in control of this process as you'd like to do. And I thought, oh, that sounds fantastic. It sounded like too much freedom. I didn't really believe it would work that way. But I thought, well, even if it's half as good as it sounds, it will be fantastic. And it was even better. So I had a fantastic time. I had such a wide range of really interesting people working on infectious disease questions. That I arrived in 1995. In 1996, there was the announcement in March of the discovery of variant CJD, a disease connected to BSE, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or also called mad cow disease. So variant CJD was the disease in humans, and it was believed to be connected. It's since been demonstrated even more convincingly to have been the human consequence of exposure to meat and meat products from BSE-infected cattle. That caused a huge sort of explosion of interest and was, being discussed in newspapers, in the House of Commons, and so on, was a big issue. How is this going to be addressed? This was a risk that was actually, when we got access to the data, so in the Oxford unit, this Wellcome Trust Center, we were the first group to get access to the BSE data outside of the government, and analyzed what there was a huge amount of data on, because there were well over 100,000 cases in cattle. So we could characterize very well what had happened in cattle. What we couldn't say very well is what would happen in humans. And that's because we had to wait and see. We couldn't, just from the few cases that have been identified, you didn't know if that was most of or all of a very small curve in human cases, or the beginning of what could be a very large curve. But it gave me this opportunity to work on a fast-moving, politically policy-relevant area, and to work very closely with colleagues that I have since continued to work with in various guises. So it felt like my experience later, like real-time analysis. And sometimes it wasn't, because so much of the epidemic had already been going on. So BSE was discovered in 1986. And so it had been going for 10 years and been identified as such, but it was very fast moving and demanding. So working very intensively. I then worked on a number of other actually fast moving and actually real time outbreak responses. Foot and mouth disease in 2001. That's a disease of cloven hoofed animals. So cattle and sheep and pigs, a few llamas. And so that was an animal-only disease that spread through the UK. I worked on SARS in 2003. Talking about my career, I should say, we moved as a group from Oxford to Imperial College in 2000 and formed what was the first ever Department of Infectious Disease Epidemiology. I stayed with that group and continued to work with them till I got my current job in Oxford in 2018. And in fact, until 2023, I held those positions jointly. I was still professor of statistical epidemiology in Imperial, 20% FTE, 80% FTE. I was here professor of applied stats. I'm now the head of department here in the Department of Statistics in Oxford, where I've been that for 2 years. I'm starting my third and final year. And as you said, I'm also, among other things, Vice President for External Affairs of the RSS. So I've continued to work in epidemiology, but been very closely working with both statisticians and epidemiologists of various types over the course of this. And of course, I've mentioned a few of the epidemics. There was the influenza pandemic in 2009. There was the Zika, which was another disease that was very important and was considered of international public health concern. They got that status specifically from the World Health Organization. West African Ebola outbreak, which was very intensively working from 2014 to 16, and of course COVID, which nobody could have failed to notice, which meant that there was this huge burst of interest and expansion of interest in infectious disease epidemiology, but also the importance of data and data analysis, all the ways and people were seeing their lives directly impacted by this because it was informing policies and informing discussions. So it's a wide range of things. So I didn't end up being the biological researcher I imagined. If I think back to, what did I picture? I mean, Jacques Cousteau. He was he worked underwater, exploring the underwater world and researching the animals, or at least that was how I perceived it. He was sort of demonstrating a bit like David Attenborough does in various other contexts here, but I wasn't aware of David Attenborough at that time as a kid. I was aware of Jacques Cousteau. And so I think he ignited my interest in animals and biological research. But, I'd never heard of an epidemiologist, so that had to wait for later. But I've never regretted that, but I do still work with people who are biologists, so who work as wildlife ecologists. And for example, I'm working with people who have worked in South Africa and Tanzania on wildlife, on domestic dogs and rabies that spreads from domestic dogs to wildlife and from domestic dogs to humans. And so it's an example of One Health, which is something I'm very interested in, where the interventions that you take and can inform with statistics can have impact on humans, on animals, and the whole ecosystem as a result.
That's amazing. You have such a wealth of experience. You've made a lot of different career decisions over your time, right from college, changing into a stats field. If you were going to give advice to somebody either early in a career or maybe still in uni or college, how do you make a decision on changing your direction?
I think I've always thought if you follow what you're interested in, the next thing you're most interested in, it will prepare you for now that doesn't work for everybody. There's sometimes people who have, a career ambition that has very clear steps and they have to go through things that they're not so interested in as a necessary component to get where they need to be. But from my point of view, I figured, well, I'm very interested in this. I mean, I made the slightly unconventional choice to go from being a lecturer, and I had the opportunity. So I was a lecturer in Edinburgh, and I was that for 3 years. And I did have the opportunity. If I'd stayed there, I would have been made permanent. Alternatively, when I came to Oxford, it wasn't a permanent job. It depended on the renewal of the Wellcome Trust Centre, and it was a post, this postdoctoral statistical advisor. And I was a little bit worried that that seemed like an unconventional thing to do. You know, once I was a lecturer, now as you might think of an assistant professor, depending on the terminology where you're working, did that seem like a sort of backward step in terms of seniority? And so I contacted professors at Harvard and said, does this seem like an insane thing to do, that I was sort of giving up an academic post? And they said that sounded like a fantastic opportunity. I should go for it. One described the opportunity in Oxford as sublime. And it was absolutely the thing I wanted to do. It did mean complicating my life otherwise, because I met, when I went to Edinburgh, I met Ben Hambley, who's now my husband. And then we went from living in the same place at Edinburgh to when I came down to Oxford, living in different places, which further apart. So it certainly didn't make my life easier in that respect, but it was absolutely worth it. And since 2000, we've both been living in Oxford together. So it did have that other complication that he got a job in Oxford just as we were moving the group from Oxford to Imperial, but luckily those are close enough together that we could live in the same place. So I absolutely understand this difficulty of, it's not just your career decisions. You have you may have a family life, or at least a personal life as well. And these things are not always, the easiest choice in one respect might not be the other one. But I would have felt that I missed out hugely in not taking this opportunity in Oxford. And Ben, my now husband, he absolutely would not have wanted me to stay in Edinburgh and have missed out on that. I mean, certainly neither of us could have known where it would have ended up leading to, but it just seemed like a super interesting opportunity. And also being a statistician, and I think we're extremely lucky as a result of this, you have so many job opportunities. I mean, one of the things that I thought when I moved from, going from being a lecturer into this job that I knew wasn't permanent, was that was okay, because even if that didn't work out, there are other jobs that I could have. There's so many opportunities. An expression I heard relatively recently is about statistician getting to play in everybody's backyard or back garden, depending on whether you're American or British, trying to speak both. And I think that's really true. And so, and there are multiple back gardens that I play in a sense of, sometimes it's with ecologists, sometimes it's with epidemiologists, sometimes it's looking at algorithms, and I'll work with people who are in computer science, how to implement those efficiently, and so on. So it's the opportunity to be so interdisciplinary. And I could decide, oh, okay, I'm also very interested in demographic change in different countries, and I could reach out. So if, I spent some time talking to people in the demography center we've got here in Oxford recently. And so there are just so many opportunities for statisticians, and the flexibility to change. I mean, being an academic, I sort of mastered my statistical domain, and I can sort of decide, okay, I have been working on infectious disease epidemiology, and I don't think I'll ever stop doing that. But I can say, oh, this person's really interesting, or that question's really interesting, hopefully both, and decide to work on something completely new. So, I think by following what you're interested in, I think that's usually the most effective way to end up in the next step that you're most interested in as well, which is a very long-winded explanation of that. But it's sort of, in some sense, it might seem like a random walk, but if you then look backwards, you can sort of say, well, actually, it was fantastic that at Oberlin I studied biology. It was great that I took some chemistry, because that's helpful for thinking about things that, learning about proteins and the way that you've got interactions between molecules on that level. And I took some physics as well, which has been helpful. I took some sociology, all of these things that I took, becoming a well-rounded person and having a liberal arts education. You can work back and put it in the context, in that lens of having directly contributed to where I am now. So there's, and the people that I've come into contact with, there is some random variation in who you happen to bump into as a sort of academic molecule moving around. but there, sometimes you have, you work on a fantastic project and then you go off and do different things. You may stay in touch, but and other times, you end up with an academic partnership that you stay with for decades. And, and that works the best when you've got complementary skills. You've both got a huge amount of respect for each other, and it's an area that, of mutual interest. And so that will evolve. And so there are just so many opportunities out there. You can't take them all.
That's amazing. And really good advice. I will hopefully take that myself. And leads on nicely actually to our next question. What advice would you give to your younger self about career development and where you might find support? I mean, you moved around so much, you've done lots of different things, lots of sort of smaller moves and bigger moves, obviously moving from lecturing to research. And it's sort of, how would you then advise yourself now that you've gone through all of that, where to find support and how to develop a career?
I'm a worrier. So I would say not to worry so much, and that doesn't just apply to career. I mean, I don't think that I worried about like, will my next job be so much, but I just have a tendency to worry and get a bit stressed. I have over time come to realize that part of the reason that I get anxious about things or sort of can't let them go is because tend to be very focused on the details and want to get to the bottom of something, and that often things you can't control, and it's hard to sort of let that go. On the other hand, I think there are aspects of, the same aspects of my personality that can sometimes mean that I can't let things go even though they upset me. Helps me, sort of unpack things and get to the bottom of them and say, okay, even though it's frustrating or complicated, we're going to keep going through this. So on the one hand, sort of, but there were plenty of people who told me not to worry. My mother would have told me that many times, and that in and of itself didn't help. But somehow it's all going to be fine. I mean, the people who were mega influential in what I ended up doing and wherever. So Roy Anderson, who I said that I moved to Oxford to join his group in 1995. And I worked with at Imperial through that whole time, and I'm still in touch with correspondence indirectly today with him. And he was amazing. And the other person was David Cox, who is the legend that is David Cox. And I was terrified to meet him, absolutely terrified. So when I started working with Roy, he told me, okay, so you've got maybe it was 6 months probation period. And at the end of the probation period, you're going to be assessed by David Cox. Because so Roy was saying, I'm not a statistician, so I'm going to have David Cox sort of assess you to see whether or not you get to keep. Absolutely terrified. Not so much terrified that I would lose the job, but just like, he's going to think I'm an idiot. He's David Cox. He's going to be, thinking all these great things, and I'm going to waffle. And so I was terrified to meet him. It ended up being a whole year before I met him, because by the time it got to my 6-month assessment, I think Roy was already happy enough with the things I was doing. It was like, okay, yes, it's fine. Maybe David signed something, but I didn't actually have any sort of assessment meeting. But I did meet David after I'd been working for Roy for about a year. So it was in the autumn of 1996 at a specific dinner that David had come to. And I was so scared to meet him. But for all of those people who have met David, they know, he's amazingly, once you get over it in yourself, in the actual discussion, he's amazingly approachable, and he's interested in what everybody's doing, and he's, super gentle in his approach, and he would never, ever make you feel like an idiot or sort of have you go away to, oh, I can't believe that I interacted like that. So he was super supportive. And he was working in Oxford at Nuffield College, and also associated with the Department of Statistics. And so, it was just amazing that I could interact with him. I could go to him with questions, and he always realized that usually when I came to him, he'd say, so is this something where you want the answer yesterday? And it's like, yes, it's very urgent. We're working on this this particular outbreak response. But also I could come and talk to him about, things I was worried about, or just so sort of the broader picture of life. So and I've never thought that David was somebody that I would be able to approach, just because he seems so eminent, and I'd have thought, that he wouldn't be interested, but he was always interested in meeting new people, and particularly young people, and until a very late stage in his career was taking on doctoral students. A couple of times he told me, "Oh, I'm getting too old. I'm not going to take on any more students." And it'd go a couple of years, and then he'd decide, oh, he did want to do that again, so take on another couple students. And so he was always interested in that. And I think that was what kept him so he would have been interested in statistics, whatever, but I think he really enjoyed the social experience of interacting with statisticians, and over decades. So I mean, really several generations of statisticians benefited hugely from collaborating with him. And it was all great. So I think, if I told my earlier self, "Oh, don't worry, you're going to get to, be mentored by David Cox," I was like, this can't be right, and it's too scary. But it was, amazing to have that interaction, and both of them were so super helpful.
Wonderful. I think I'm going to move it along a bit now. So, Christl, as a woman in what's perceived to be a traditionally male-dominated field, do you feel you had to approach certain aspects of your career differently in order to stand out and succeed? And what strategies and actions did you use and find effective to do that?
Well, the people that I talked about, so both senior men, Roy Anderson and David Cox, but both supportive of me in a way that I think had nothing to do with gender. I mean, it would just, they would recognize somebody as being talented, and help them, and sort of being junior and needing advice. One of the things I realized was I shouldn't dress in a way that looked like I could possibly be catering staff. And that was because I went to a meeting, and I was about to introduce myself to the chairman of a big organization, and Roy Anderson was there, but sort of off. And I went to this person, and I was about to say, "Oh, I know Roy's spoken to you about our work. I wanted to introduce myself." And the person looked up at me they had a cup, and they were about to pour themselves a coffee, and said, "Oh, should I not be pouring this for myself?" And handed the things to me. And I sort of trying to assess then why this had happened. I was wearing a white shirt and a black skirt and black tights. And when I looked around, that's also what the women who were serving things looked like. And I was like, okay. I still don't think, even if a man had been dressed in black trousers and a white shirt, that interaction probably would have happened. But I did also think, there are also cues that you can sort of help give. And one of the things was trying to avoid being in his, and he did look sort of embarrassed when I said, no, you can pour your own coffee. I was introducing myself. But, that was one of the things. So being at that point, a woman in her 20s in this situation, and I don't think men would have had to worry about that. I had one time had a potential collaborator explain that one of the ways I could contribute to a project was by babysitting his children, so he would have more time to work on it. Yeah. Unbelievable. I didn't know quite what to say. I mean, I had multiple years of postdoctoral experience at this point. And so I went to Roy Anderson at the time and explained what had happened, and said, I'm not saying I will not work with this person, but I just want you to know that this happened. And if things go this way again, then I will be coming to see you in a more formal capacity. And I don't know what he did, but it didn't happen again. I also steered, whenever possible, well clear of this person. I mean, that was particularly sexist, but there can be people that you interact with badly in any sort of way. And one of the fantastic things about your career going forward is that you can make more choices. You're in a, you are more empowered to decide who you're going to work with and who you aren't. But when I needed that support, I got it. I mean, there was no formal confrontation. It was never acknowledged, sort of openly, but it solved the problem, whatever he did. But I think, so just being willing to stand up, and that was relatively early in the time that I worked with Roy, and I was a little bit worried that he would think, oh, she's American, and somehow, I think at that time it was seen that sort of American women might complain more about the way they were treated than women in the UK. It was a time when a lot of the women that I met here didn't want to call themselves feminists, and which surprised me, because to me, coming from the US, I thought, well, what is a feminist stand for? Well, people, women being treated equally. So I was sort of surprised if you use that definition and you were a woman, where you wouldn't agree with that. And I think things have changed a lot. I mean, people wearing T-shirts saying this is what a feminist looks like. I think things have changed a lot since the 1990s. But there's certainly, plenty of stories that people have were treated much worse than that. But it was, it was the fact that I had someone, Roy Anderson was a man, but he was still very much recognized that was completely out of line and supportive of that. But it does still, there are still things that came up, and it was somewhat after that I was walking to an event. So we were going to a work dinner, and I'm walking along, and I got asked, oh, was my husband babysitting this evening? I was like, I just looked and said, it's not babysitting when you're the father. And, this hadn't been said to my male colleagues who also had children, oh, your wife is babysitting, because it was somehow assumed that somehow in the evening women took care of their kids, and if men did it, it was like a special thing where they were babysitting, presumably on, for my gratitude. It just is a very strange thing. So there are still, these things that jar. And so, and I did just reply was, well, it's not called babysitting when you're the dad. And that, just left it at that, which, I hope that the person was thinking, oh, oops, I just, that had just come out without thinking. They may have thought I was being a pain, but, it was like, well, I don't think that's an appropriate way to describe this. And then you move on. So I suppose being willing to, sort of stand your ground, but also not making a huge deal out of it. Sometimes, though, of course, things happen to people where they have to make a huge deal of it. And so I'm lucky that I didn't end up with bigger challenges, but, it's partly being willing to face that. And when I saw other people sometimes being treated really badly, supporting them and encouraging them to speak out and saying, you really need to, this is not okay.
I think just to quickly follow up, obviously, so you've dealt with situations by sort of not escalating them, but I think in the cases where you've seen somebody who needs help or who needs to speak up, what would your advice be to them, and what would your advice be to other people who need help, the people around them?
I think to seek an ally. I mean, I did offer to someone who ended up not taking this offer but that I would go with them when they sought help, to try and encourage them to do that. And I think now there's a lot more position. I mean, even like in my children's school, there was sort of the talking service, and it was like, they said that they would talk to the kids about anything. It didn't have to be about school. It could be about any aspect, and they could go to teachers that weren't in their year group and so on to get an outside perspective. And I think the universities are offering that for students, and they're offering that for staff as well. So, for example, we have mental health first aiders, both within the Department of Statistics, but we also have mental health first aiders in other departments that you can call upon if you're here. Because if you want to talk about something that's bothering you that you might not want your colleagues to know about, even one of your trusted colleagues, you can go there. And then if it's to the point where you need to make, at least approach making a sort of complaint, or say, a line needs to be drawn here. I think being able to get allies, and so to being able to offer your support to somebody and say, I will come with you. It's, yes, it's scary, but it's, addressing it's less scary than putting up with it going forward.
Thank you. Okay, I think we'll move forward a bit now. So you spoke a little bit about your volunteering time as well, with RSS, particularly as VP for External Affairs. How has that part of your work influenced your career growth and developed your leadership skills?
Well, I think it was really important that I kept my sort of statistical hats on, at least some, or at least made sure I had them on some of the time while I was working in a department of infectious disease epidemiology. I mean, I don't think those are at all inconsistent. Statisticians work in all different kinds of departments, but I think it was really good that I kept contact with those colleagues and kept in that community, because otherwise, yeah, I could have somehow lost contact with other statisticians, and I don't think that would have been helpful. I think also helping attract other young statisticians into areas, interdisciplinary areas, such as infectious disease epidemiology. So that was important. It used to be hard for us to get statistically qualified applicants while advertising jobs from infectious disease epi. It's not now, and I think that's a really good thing. So, I mean, in part, I knew that was the case because statisticians had so many different job directions they could go into. And I certainly benefited in other ways from there being more jobs than there were statisticians. And so you felt like you had a lot of choice. And as I said, I felt confident I could make it might be an unconventional choice, but I could make it and it would still be fine afterwards, even if that job didn't work out. But I think it's really important to encourage other people who are talented to take on statistical roles, to work in statistics. And, I'm particularly interested in applied statistics, making sure that people see the benefits of that when they're sort of making their decision. And also to make clear that you can move and swerve your career in different directions. So I'm interested in this area, then I'm interested in that one, and keep going and don't feel like you have to be boxed in. So, I've been in department maths and stats, Department of Zoology, infectious disease epidemiology, and now Department of Statistics. And of course, I trained in a Department of Biostatistics. So I think, I've sort of moved in and out of being in a category of being a statistician, but I have been a statistician throughout, and I think it's important to give back. Also, I think the Royal Statistical Society is such a great membership society and able to, sort of facilitate interactions, provide courses, have great meetings of the conference sort, as well as the sort of discussion meetings and local groups. There's just a whole different wide range of ways that people can get involved. I was one of the William Guy lecturers, so I represented the Royal Statistical Society when I went out to schools. And that's a fantastic thing to do as well. I mean, there are female students do very well. A lot of the ones who take further math do incredibly well, but less of them take further math than we might like, or less than, so encouraging people. And that means encouraging people when they're having to make that decision at 16, which is, to my mind, extremely early. Maybe I don't know if I've been here, if I would have taken that. So, given that I thought I was going to be a biologist, it might well have been that I wouldn't have taken further math had I grown up in the UK. And it might have been harder to make that career change, or sort of, it wasn't even a career at that point, but that educational change in the UK system versus in the US. So, obviously, if you say, well, if you take further maths, you have the choice and the option to move later on, but you can just wait and see.
It's had a wide impact. For clarity for everyone listening, by the way, I didn't take further maths, and I'm literally a statistician right now, so it's possible. So you've done an awful lot of work with RSS over the years then? How have you managed to sort of balance that with the actual work that you're doing? Is that about making it clear when you arrive at a job that, oh, I've got commitments to RSS, or I want to make commitments to RSS, or is it something that is a bit more ad hoc ongoing?
I think it's more ad hoc. I mean, I'm very much in the, oh, I think this is important. I mean, I have had to, especially becoming head of department, realize I can't say yes to everything just because it sounds cool. Which, sounds, that sounds like it would be fun. I think it'd be really useful. This is an impact I'd like that. I can't say yes to all those things. So I do have to sort of pick and choose just because of resource. Otherwise, I'm just run ragged and not getting other things done. But it's this commitment to both the area and, as I see, to sort of making sure that young people continue to come into statistics, because I think they benefit and society benefits as well.
Nice. So there's a lot of information available to general public. How can you describe how important data literacy and education are when making policy decisions or informing others, even informing the public, and why?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think we live in an area where there's an era where there's a lot of sort of false information being spread, and people attempts to influence people with potential ill intent, not just misunderstanding of data. So people understanding or questioning where data came from and what agenda people might have, I think, is incredibly important. As statisticians, we can sort of do that. We have some great communicators. I mean, David Spiegelhalter is a prime example of somebody who can manage to distill things down into both speaking in a way that's accessible to a wide range of people, but also being very, very profound in the way that he does that. So, the Royal Statistical Society being able to support and encourage people to do that communication, I think, is really important, especially in my area of infectious disease epidemiology. Trying for people to understand the sorts of analyses that we undertake, to understand disease transmission and also opportunities for control, I think is vital for people to have faith in the system, to understand that public health is and should always be evidence-based. And that means something different at the start of an epidemic, because at the start of an epidemic, especially a new thing, it's the opposite of big data, very little data. And in fact, I want it to stay little data because I'd like there to be very few cases. And then you have to do what you can best with the data that you have available, but also acknowledge uncertainty. And I think data literacy means people becoming familiar with and actually appreciative of estimates of uncertainty and acknowledging them. It shouldn't be seen as, well, this person has acknowledged uncertainty, so we discount them and we listen to someone who says, well, I know the truth, because it may not be possible to know the truth at that point, and being able to discern those. So in some sense, it's sort of like the snake oil salesperson of like, well, they have uncertainty, but believe me, I do. Questioning, well, how can you at this point? How can you know for certain if there's so little data available? So it's really important that the public has that, especially the voting public.
That's that's one of the reasons I got into this, is sort of to be part of the machine that produces reliable statistics and is upfront about the limitations. And that, I think, fits in with all the RSS work, doesn't it? That we actually, in attracting people to the profession, in trying to spread the message, we end up also spreading data literacy, and that benefits everybody. But now that we've addressed attracting younger statisticians to the profession, how would you then develop them into future leaders, whether they're in your team or maybe you're mentoring somebody else? How do you identify ways to help them, and how do you approach it?
I think it's realizing that everybody can take part in being a leader, or at least being a role model to start with, and sort of so you have the MSc students can go along with you to school events and talk about what they do. They can come along to the undergraduate lectures and talk to the undergraduates about what they're doing in their master's degree. So they can help provide sort of coding advice to undergraduates when they're doing undergraduate projects. And moving along, the doctoral students can help with undergraduate projects or advising the MSc students, as well as peer support, which is, I think, incredibly important as well. And then postdoc. So sometimes we have interns coming along, and they can be supervised by doctoral students, for example. And so, each of those, as you're moving up, then as people start to become, if they finish their education, whether that's a master's or a doctoral degree, then they're going in to have more responsibilities. You can say, okay, well, this is how you can put in a proposal for a project you want to do, whether that's academia, where you're putting in a grant proposal, or you're making a bid for resource in an organization to be put into some particular thing. And so encouraging people, okay, I want you to take the lead on this, which doesn't mean I'm abandoning you. It's like, okay, you put down what your priorities are and think how you'd flesh them out. Here's an example of a proposal that's gotten through from somebody else. And then I'll help and give you feedback. And I'm happy to be on it as a mentor or a sponsor, whatever the terminology is, but I want you to take this forward. So sort of gradually moving that up. And then, then people will have that experience and they can go on with, well, because you've fronted this kind of project, then you're eligible to front the next kind. Yeah. So you've supervised a doctoral student, so now you can put in a grant for a postdoc, whatever area you're working in. So I think it's sort of building that up gradually and not sort of saying, oh, leadership isn't for you now. And then somehow magically you cross over a threshold and you went from leading no one to knowing what you're doing. And I think but where do we get, so it's partly this having this experience and this sort of mentored time, but it's also thinking about, ways in which you've seen people take leadership that either impressed you and you thought, that's fantastic. I would like to that's the culture I would like to have in my group of whatever size. And also by counterexample thinking, I hope I never end up saying something like that, or if I hear that coming out of my mouth, we'll sort of stop and say, wait a second, let's rethink this, and look at it from a different perspective.
Nearly started talking on mute there. Can you give us an example of one of those moments that you pick out and you just say, I want to be that kind of leader?
Oh, well, I think, David Spiegelhalter, somebody mentioned, just sort of watching him in action. I mean, I would never be able to speak like David Spiegelhalter, but it's fantastic to watch him do it and to sort of understand how he's able to engage a whole audience. And, and he can do that whether or not it's giving evidence to maybe MPs or something like that, decision makers, whether or not he's on television talking to people, or whether he's, sitting in a room full of people whether it's giving a lecture or afterwards in the discussion. So, I mean, that's sort of thought leadership and communication leadership is amazing. I mean, David Cox is a completely different personality, but is amazing leadership in there. And again, it's not that I think that I'd ever be able to emulate David Cox completely in any sense, but sort of realize, how he treated people and how he made time for people all the way through, despite the fact that he was, worked as the head of Nuffield College, which can take a huge amount of time, but he still made time for research. He still made time for supervision of students. So I think, sort of looking at these things, what are the things that I value and watch people doing and think, oh, that's amazing to do. It can be incredibly difficult to do all the things that you think are important within a reasonable amount of time, and also have some time off so I don't, lose my own mind, and can spend time with my family. But, so it's not that you can do everything, but it's a matter of thinking through your priorities and recognizing how you're going to make those trade-offs.
So thanks very much. We're coming near to the end of our time, so I think I'm gonna ask our last question. We asked this one to everybody. What is your one piece of advice towards being a successful leader?
I think put yourself in the other person's shoes. If you're about to say something, think how it would sound to the other person. And so, you will have come across, as I said, you will come across leaders that you think are amazing. And, you can't always emulate that, but that should be a goal, I think, in sort of thinking how you do it. And, and that they had respect for people and that they were balancing things in a way that you thought worked for everyone.
That's brilliant, and I think we've come to the end. So thank you for that immensely really useful conversation there, Christl, Andrew. There's some really great sound bites from this, and I love some of the quotes you got, and some of the themes that are coming through each of the interviews as well. So I mean, I love, Christl, what you said. Statisticians get to play in everyone's backyard. I think that's great. I think it reminds me of something I said to someone recently. I was talking to a group of young people about why they should consider data and how it should be considered, and in an area where usually I think we were all, where I'm from, we were all told to go be tradesmen if you weren't sure what you want to do, because people will always need a tradesman. And I called the statistician a digital tradesman, because like, well, organizations definitely will always need them, and they're very multi-purposeful and can go across different industries and organizations. And I think, yeah, you've described it much better than I can. There was also some other great points. I think the advice of what we had of the experience you were able to share of walking into a meeting room and someone mistaking you due to the way you were dressed. I think it followed some other advice we had of similar incidences where some of the advice was given for women entering a meeting where it may be male dominated or led by a male, where they're likely to ask a question to a male and direct it to a male first. So they were very much like, when you enter the room, make sure you introduce yourself, but you took it one step further in terms of how you might want to introduce yourself and prepare yourself for that meeting. And we've had other instances where there's been similar, so that was really good as well. So lots of links there. And then finally towards the end, there was some, I thought it was a great example about leadership. So examples of leadership, how you could develop them and how you could also look for leadership opportunities. And I think there's a lot of natural thinking that you expect that to start in a work environment, and you wait for someone to identify you as a leader rather than you wanting to identify your own opportunities. And I think that mindset that you mentioned, so think of the opportunities. If you're an MSc grad, like think of how you could give back to schools. So there's leadership opportunities at every stage of your career. It's about identifying them and using them, and that in turn gives you the experience to move further in your career and build on those as well. So really good take on that, and to take on board what's been done well or not as well going forwards. And I think finally the main theme that's running through each of these is people work in statistics, data science, and so forth. As much as some people may be working in isolation, some may be in teams, there's a great sense, and everyone seems to talk about it, in that everyone's happy to give back and give time to each other. Every interview, whether they've worked in academia, research, industry, government, they've all spoken very highly about how each of their peers have had time for them, and whether that be as a network, community, or even as peers to help them with research and so forth. And it seems to be that is a big thing within this community and industry, and people should take advantage of that. So thank you for highlighting that as well. That's it from us. So thank you both for taking part. It's been really great to have you on. And yeah, I look forward to everyone taking part. So we'll end the recording there. Thank you.
Thank you.